The walls were built to break men. The guards were trained to kill those who ran, and yet some men refused to stay. Throughout history, prisons were not just places of punishment. They were engineered to destroy the human will. Iron bars, stone walls, armed guards, and isolation. All designed to make one truth feel absolute. There is no way out. But some men refuse to accept that truth. This is the story of 10 of the most daring, terrifying, and improbable prison escapes in human history. These were not just escapes from cells. They were escapes from death itself. Story 1. Château, France, 1840s. The real-world inspiration for one of literature's greatest escape myths. Auguste Mingy was a political prisoner held in one of France's most feared fortresses, Château, surrounded entirely by sea. It was considered inescapable. The cold water alone was believed to be a death sentence for any man who tried to swim free. Mingy spent years studying every movement of every guard. He memorized the tides, he carved tools from the fragments of his own cell, and then one night, in total darkness, he moved. He lowered himself into the freezing black water and swam. For hours, with nothing but the distant lights of the French coast as his guide. When he finally dragged himself ashore, exhausted and barely conscious, he was free. He had done what every guard, every wall, and every mile of open sea had promised was impossible. His story would echo through history and inspire one of the greatest novels ever written. Story 2. Libby Prison, Richmond, Virginia, 1864. The American Civil War's most audacious tunnel escape. Libby Prison was no ordinary cell block. It held over 1,000 Union Army officers in a converted warehouse under brutal conditions deep inside Confederate territory. Escape seemed not just impossible, it seemed suicidal. Colonel Thomas Rose had a plan. Over 53 nights, he and a small team of officers secretly dug a tunnel by hand, beneath the prison floor under an active street and out to the other side, using only a broken shovel, a chisel, and their bare hands. On the night of February 9th, 1864, 109 Union officers crawled through that tunnel one by one, slipping out into the streets of the Confederate capital under the noses of enemy soldiers. It was the largest prison escape in American history. 59 men made it to Union lines. 48 were recaptured, 2 drowned crossing the river. But 59 men walked back into the arms of freedom, because one man refused to accept that walls were permanent. Story 3. Holzminden Pow Camp, Germany, 1918. World War I's greatest escape, buried in history but extraordinary in execution. Holzminden was run by Commandant Karl Niemeyer, a cruel, arrogant man who boasted openly that no British officer would ever escape his camp. That declaration lit a fire that would burn for months beneath his feet. Literally, Lieutenant Colonel David Bray led a team of British officers who spent 9 months digging a tunnel over 60 meters long, built secretly beneath the barracks floor, reinforced with wood from bed frames, and ventilated with stolen piping. On the night of July 23rd, 1918, 29 officers crawled through that tunnel and vanished into the German countryside. 10 of them made it all the way to neutral Holland. The war ended months later, and those 10 men were already free. Story 4, Colditz Castle, Germany, World War II, the prison that became a legend because the men inside it refused to stop trying. Colditz was the Nazi regime's answer to a difficult problem. Their most determined Allied escape artists, officers who had already escaped from other camps, were all collected here. The message was clear: if you can escape anywhere else, you will not escape here. British officer Harry Neve became the first Allied prisoner to make a successful home run escape from Colditz. He disguised himself as a German corporal, walked through 3 sets of checkpoints, boarded a train, crossed into Switzerland, and reported for duty back in England. He walked out of the most secure prison in Nazi Germany wearing a costume made from cardboard, painted cloth, and stolen thread. The guards saluted him as he passed. He nodded back and kept walking. He later became a prominent British statesman. His escape was not just an act of survival, it was an act of will that defined the rest of his life. Colditz did not break him. It built him. Story 5. The Hanoi Hilton, North Vietnam, 1960s to 1970s, where American pilots were held in conditions designed to shatter the mind, and a handful refused to break. American POWs held at HXALN, nicknamed the Hanoi Hilton with bitter irony, faced years of isolation, interrogation, and psychological pressure. Physical escape was nearly impossible, so some prisoners devised something remarkable, an invisible prison within the prison. Using a tap code, a grid-based system of knocks, American prisoners communicated through walls, pipes, and floors. They shared names, ranks, plans, and most importantly, hope. They built a community inside concrete and silence. They escaped the prison in their minds even when their bodies could not leave. Story 6, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, San Francisco Bay, 1962. The most famous escape from the prison the United States government declared impossible to escape. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers did not escape Alcatraz by force. They escaped it by patience and extraordinary ingenuity. Over months, using a single sharpened spoon, they dug through the concrete walls of their cells without ever being detected. On the night of June 11th, 1962, they climbed through ventilation shafts, scaled the prison walls, and launched a handmade inflatable raft into San Francisco Bay, built entirely from stolen raincoats. Then they paddled into the dark water and disappeared. Forever, they were never found. The FBI classified their fate as unknown for decades. To this day, no one knows with certainty whether they survived or drowned. But their escape, their plan, their execution, their audacity stands as one of the most meticulous acts of human will ever recorded inside a prison. Story 7, Stalag Luft 3, Poland, 1944, The Great Escape. The night that proved that men, given enough time and enough reason, can tunnel through anything. Royal Air Force officer Roger Bushell organized over 600 Allied prisoners into one of the most sophisticated escape operations in the history of warfare. Not one tunnel, 3 tunnels, codenamed Tom, Dick, and Harry, each over 100 feet long, built with an engineering precision that still astonishes historians today. On the night of March 24th, 1944, 76 men crawled through Tunnel Harry into the frozen forest beyond the camp perimeter. It was the largest mass escape of Allied prisoners from a German camp in the entire war. Only 3 men reached safety, 73 were recaptured, and 50 of those men were executed by direct order of Adolf Hitler. Not returned to the camp, but shot. It was an act of calculated brutality, meant to end the spirit of escape forever. It did not end the spirit of escape. It made it eternal. Story 8, The Tower of London, England, 1716, when a Jacobite rebel escaped one of England's most ancient and feared prisons, dressed as his wife. William Maxwell, the 5th Earl of Nithsdale, had been condemned to death for his role in the Jacobite uprising of 9715. His execution was scheduled for the following morning. His wife, Winifred, refused to accept that verdict. Winifred visited the tower the night before the execution with a small group of ladies. In the chaos of tearful goodbyes, she dressed her husband in women's clothing, a cloak, a hood, rouge on his cheeks, and walked him past the guards and out of the Tower of London forever. Lord Nithsdale reached Rome, where he lived in exile for the rest of his life. His wife's courage had written him a second life out of nothing. The Tower of London had held kings and queens, traitors and saints. It had never been escaped by a condemned man in a dress until that night. Story 9, Dachau concentration camp, Germany, 1941. A story almost too extraordinary to believe, and yet it happened. Jörg Elser had already done the near impossible once. In 1939, he had planted a bomb in a Munich beer hall that missed killing Adolf Hitler by 13 minutes. He was arrested, brought to Dachau, and held as a special prisoner, too valuable to execute, too dangerous to release. Elser was given unusual privileges, carpentry tools to keep him occupied. He used them to plan an escape. He carved, shaped, and adapted materials within his cell, probing every boundary of his confinement with methodical patience. But in April 1945, with Allied forces just days away, the SS executed him before he could reach freedom. Jörg Elser came closer to changing history than almost any other single individual in the Second World War. He nearly stopped it all. The fact that the world does not say his name often enough is itself a kind of tragedy. Story 10, a Soviet gulag, Siberia, 1941. 7 men walked into the most hostile wilderness on Earth, and some of them walked all the way to freedom. Slomir Rauix was a Polish cavalry officer, sent to a Siberian labor camp in 19,940 after refusing to collaborate with Soviet authorities. He and 6 others, men from Poland, Yugoslavia, Lithuania, and Latvia, escaped the camp in the dead of winter with virtually nothing, no maps, no compasses, no food stores. They walked, for months, through the frozen tundra of Siberia, across the Gobi Desert, over the Himalayas. They survived on bark, insects, and whatever the land offered. They crossed into British India having walked over 4,000 miles. 3 of the 7 made it, but they made it 4,000 miles on foot, in the worst conditions the earth can produce. No walls held them, no fence stopped them. The world itself became their prison, and they walked through it anyway. 10 stories, 10 prisons, 10 different centuries, countries, and wars. And in every single case, one thing remained constant: the human refusal to accept that a wall, a fence, a sea, or a frozen continent was the final word on their fate. History remembers its battles, its generals, and its strategies. But sometimes the most remarkable acts of the human spirit happen not on a battlefield, but inside 4 walls in the dark, with nothing but time and the will to survive. Walls are built by the powerful to contain those they fear. And yet, again and again, across centuries of human history, men and women have looked at those walls and chosen to see not an ending, but a problem to be solved. They built the walls, but they could not build ceilings over the human spirit. And that, in the end, is why some people always find a way out.